You left your family. You flew thousands of kilometers across the Pacific, landed in a country you'd maybe never been to before, and within days, you were standing in an orchard in Hawke's Bay at 6 a.m, picking fruit in the cold. Someone had told you, maybe a cousin, maybe an agent, maybe the employer themselves, that 7 months in New Zealand would earn you more than 2 years back home. And that sounded like a deal you couldn't turn down. So you said goodbye, you packed a bag, and you came. Then you got your first payslip, and the number at the bottom was not the number at the top. Not even close. There were lines you didn't recognize. Pay, ACC, accommodation, transport. Each one taking a slice before you'd touched a single dollar. And the question that hit you, the one that kept you up that night in the workers' quarters, wasn't complicated. It was simple. How much of this can I actually send home? Nobody explained the rules before you got on the plane. Nobody sat you down and said, here's what will be taken, here's why, and here's how to make sure the most possible reaches your family. You were just expected to figure it out. And that's not your fault. That's a system that moves people across oceans, but doesn't always explain what happens to their money once they arrive. That changes today. By the end of this video, you're going to understand how RSE worker finances actually work in New Zealand. Not the brochure version, the real version. You'll see exactly where your money goes between the orchard and your pocket, and then exactly how to make sure the maximum amount gets home to the people you're doing all of this for. Everything in RSE worker finances comes from 2 questions. The first is this: where does your money actually go between the gross pay at the top of your payslip and the net pay at the bottom? The second is this: once that money is in your hand, how do you move it home without losing even more along the way? Those 2 questions have names. The first one is about deductions. The second one is about remittance. And once you understand both, the entire system becomes something you can work with instead of something that works on you. We're going to start with why this scheme exists in the first place. Before we can answer those 2 questions, you need to see what the world looked like before the RSE scheme existed. Go back to the early 2000s. New Zealand had a problem. Every summer and autumn, the horticulture and viticulture industries, the orchards, the vineyards, the kiwi fruit packhouses, needed tens of thousands of workers for a few months. Pick the apples, prune the vines, pack the fruit. Hard physical work that had to happen in a narrow window or the crop would rot. And there simply weren't enough New Zealanders willing to do it. Not at that pay. Not in those locations. Not for that duration. At the same time, across the Pacific, communities in Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and elsewhere had a different problem. There weren't enough jobs. Wages were low. Families needed income that simply didn't exist locally, and young, strong, willing workers were looking for opportunity. So in 2007, the New Zealand government built a bridge. They called it the Recognised Seasonal Employer Scheme, RSE. The idea was simple. Approved employers in New Zealand could bring workers from Pacific Island nations for a set period, typically up to 7 months, sometimes 9, to do seasonal work. Workers would earn New Zealand wages, send money home, and return at the end of the season. The orchards would get labour. The Pacific would get income. Both sides would benefit. And in many ways, it works. The RSE scheme moves thousands of workers every year. It puts real New Zealand dollars into Pacific economies. It's one of the most significant economic links between Aotearoa and the Pacific Islands. But, and this is the part that matters for this video, the bridge has tolls on both sides. And if you don't know what those tolls are, you can't plan for them. Before you can understand the deductions or the remittance costs, you need to understand one idea that makes both of them make sense. It's called gross to net, and it's the most important concept on your payslip. Here's what it means. When your employer says you're earning $23.15 an hour, which was the minimum wage in 2024, That number is your gross pay. It's the starting point. It's the number at the top of the river. But between that number and the number that actually lands in your bank account, there are dams. Each dam has a name. Each one takes a portion of the water. And the river that reaches the bottom, your take-home pay, your net, is always smaller than the river at the top. This isn't unique to RSE workers. Every single worker in New Zealand has deductions. But for RSE workers, there are extra ones that most Kiwi workers never see. Accommodation deductions, transport costs, sometimes food. And each one is legal, but only within specific rules. The point is this: if you don't know how many dams are on your river, you can't plan how much water will be left at the bottom. And if you can't plan that, you can't plan what you send home. Everything starts with reading the payslip from top to bottom and knowing what each line means. Now that you have the foundation, the two tools are straightforward. Let's start with the first one, the deductions. Where does your money actually go? The biggest deduction on any RSE worker's payslip is pay. Pay as you earn. It's the income tax that every worker in New Zealand pays, and it comes out automatically before your pay reaches your account. The amount depends on how much you earn and which tax code you're on. Most RSE workers are on tax code M, which is for people with one job and no student loan. Here's how it works in practice. The first $14,000 you earn in a tax year is taxed at 10.5%. From $14,001 to $48,000, it's 17.5%. Above that, it's 30%. Now, most RSE workers are in New Zealand for part of the year, not the full year. So the actual amount of pay taken depends on your earnings over your stay. But here's the thing that catches people out. The pay system is designed for full-year residents. If you're here for 6 or 7 months, the tax calculations can sometimes over-deduct, take more than they should, because the system assumes you'll be earning all year. This matters because it means you might be owed a tax refund at the end of the season. Many RSE workers don't know this. They leave New Zealand without claiming back the money the IRD owes them. That refund could be hundreds of dollars, real money that belongs to you. The second deduction is accommodation. Under the RSE scheme, your employer provides housing, but it's not free. They're allowed to deduct a portion of your pay to cover the cost of your accommodation. There are rules. The accommodation must meet healthy home standards. The deduction must be reasonable and agreed to in your employment agreement before you start. The employer can't charge you market rent for a 4-bedroom house in town when you're sharing a room with 3 other workers. There are caps and guidelines, and the Labour Inspectorate monitors compliance. But here's where it gets real. Accommodation deductions can take a significant chunk, sometimes $70 to over $100 a week, depending on the region and the setup. Over a full season, that's thousands of dollars. And for many workers, this is the deduction that hurts the most, because you didn't choose the accommodation, you didn't negotiate the price, and you can't move somewhere cheaper. Then there's transport. Most RSE employers cover part of the airfare, often at least half, but some costs still come out of your pay. Local transport between your accommodation and the worksite is often deducted too. Again, it must be in the employment agreement. Again, there are rules. But again, it's another dam on the river. ACC, the Accident Compensation Corporation levy, is a smaller deduction, but it's there. Every worker in New Zealand pays it. It funds the no-fault accident insurance system. If you get injured at work or anywhere else in New Zealand, ACC covers your treatment and part of your lost income. It's a good system, but it's still money off the top. Put it all together, and this is what a real payslip might look like. You work 50 hours in a week at $23.15 an hour. That's $1,157.50 gross. Then pay takes roughly $200. Accommodation takes maybe $90. Transport takes maybe $20. ACC takes a small slice, and suddenly your take-home is somewhere around $800. Maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. That's roughly 70% of what you earned. For someone who came to New Zealand expecting to send most of their pay home, that 30% gap between gross and net can feel like a punch. Not because the deductions are illegal, most of them are legitimate, but because nobody explained the maths before you started. The key point is this: every deduction has rules, and knowing those rules is the difference between accepting what you're told and checking whether it's right. Your employment agreement should list every deduction. If it doesn't, or if something doesn't match, you have the right to question it. The Labour Inspectorate exists for exactly this reason. Now let's look at the second question. You've got your net pay. Let's say you keep enough for food and basics, and you want to send the rest home. How does that money travel? This is the remittance side of the equation, and it's where a different kind of cost appears. When you send money from New Zealand to Samoa or Tonga or Vanuatu, two things happen. First, the transfer service charges you a fee. That fee might be anywhere from $5 to $25 per transaction, depending on who you use. Second, and this is the part most people miss, the service takes a margin on the exchange rate. They give you a rate that's slightly worse than the real mid-market rate. The difference between the rate they give you and the rate that actually exists is their hidden profit. And it can be significant. Here's what that looks like in real numbers. Say you're sending 1,000 New Zealand dollars to Tonga. The official exchange rate might give you around 2,300 Tongan paanga. But the transfer service gives you 2,150. That difference, 150 paanga, is the exchange rate margin. Add the visible fee of maybe $15, and you've lost the equivalent of over 60 New Zealand dollars on a single transfer. Over a full season, if you're sending money home fortnightly, those costs stack up to hundreds of dollars. Real money that leaves New Zealand but never arrives in your family's hands. It evaporates in the middle. The thing is, not all channels cost the same. Some bank transfers charge high fees but offer a decent exchange rate. Some money transfer services charge low fees but hide the cost in a terrible exchange rate. Some newer digital services offer better rates on both. The difference between the most expensive channel and the cheapest can be $30 to $50 per transfer. Over a 7-month season, sending money fortnightly, that's $400 to $700. Enough to make a real difference to a family back home. And then there's timing. Exchange rates move. The New Zealand dollar against the Samoan tala, the Tongan paanga, or the Vanuatu vatu isn't fixed. It changes every day. Some weeks, your $1,000 buys more. Some weeks, it buys less. You can't control this, but you can be aware of it. Sending everything in one lump sum at the end of the season is a gamble on one exchange rate. Sending smaller amounts regularly spreads the risk. Neither is perfect, but understanding that the exchange rate matters is the first step to not being surprised by it. The key point is this. Every transfer has two costs: the fee you can see and the exchange rate margin you can't. If you only look at the fee, you're only seeing half the picture. The cheapest looking option isn't always the cheapest. You need to calculate the total amount that actually arrives. Here's the part most people never see. We've talked about deductions and remittance as if they're two separate problems. One happens on the payslip, the other happens at the money transfer counter. But they're not two separate problems. They're two tolls on the same road. Think about it this way. You wake up at 5 in the morning. You pick fruit for 10 hours. Every dollar you earn starts a journey. The first toll booth is your pay slip, pay, accommodation, transport, ACC. And by the time the dollar gets through, it's lost roughly 30% of its value. Then the surviving 70 cents starts the second leg of the journey, from your New Zealand bank account to your family. And the second toll booth, transfer fees and exchange rate margins, takes another 5 to 8%. By the time that original dollar reaches your family's hands, it might be 63 or 64 cents. You earned $1. They received 64 cents. And the thing is, both toll booths are negotiable. not in a haggling sense, but in a knowing the rules sense. You can check that your payee is correct and claim a refund if it's not. You can verify that your accommodation deduction matches your employment agreement. You can compare remittance channels and choose the one where the total cost, fee plus exchange rate, is lowest. The workers who send the most money home aren't necessarily the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who lose the least at both toll booths. Deductions and remittance costs aren't two problems. They're two ends of the same pipe. And every dollar you save at either end is a dollar that reaches your family. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. The entire financial life of an RSE worker is about protecting the dollar at every stage of its journey. From orchard to payslip, from payslip to pocket, from pocket to home. Now that you see the full picture, let's talk about where people get tripped up. There are 3 mistakes that come up again and again, and all of them are avoidable. The first is assuming the gross hourly rate is what you'll take home. It never is. If someone tells you you'll earn $23 an hour and you multiply that by 50 hours and think you're getting $1,150 in your hand, you'll be disappointed every single payday. Always calculate from net, not gross. Ask your employer or a colleague what the typical take-home looks like after all deductions. Plan your remittances from that number, not the number on the job listing. The second mistake is sending money home through the first channel you find without comparing. The workers' quarters have posters. Someone recommends a service. You walk into town and use whatever's available. But a 10-minute comparison could save you $30 to $50 per transfer. Over a season, that's real money. Ask other workers what they use. Look at the total received amount, not just the fee. The third mistake is leaving New Zealand without checking if the IRD owes you a tax refund. Over-deduction of payee is common for workers who are only here part of the year. The process isn't complicated. You can file through MyIR or contact the IRD directly. But you need to do it. Nobody is going to chase you down and hand you the money. If you leave without checking, that refund sits there. It belongs to you. Go get it. Let me show you exactly how this knowledge is useful right now. Say you're about to start your first RSE season. Before you leave home, ask your employer for a copy of the employment agreement. Read it. Look for every line that says deduction, accommodation, transport, anything else. Write down the numbers. Then estimate your weekly gross pay based on the hours you expect to work. Subtract each deduction. That's your real weekly take-home. Now take that number, subtract what you need for food and basics, and that's your remittance budget. That's how much you can realistically send home each fortnight. Next, before you send your first dollar, compare at least 2 or 3 remittance channels. For each one, check the fee and the exchange rate. Calculate the total that would actually arrive in your family's account. Pick the one where the most arrives, not the one with the lowest visible fee. If you're mid-season right now, pull out your last payslip. Read every line. Does the accommodation deduction match your employment agreement? Is your tax code correct? If anything looks wrong, talk to your employer first. If that doesn't resolve it, contact the Labor Inspectorate. The system has protections, but protections only work if you use them. And if your season is ending, log into MyIR or contact the IRD before you fly home. Ask whether you're owed a pay refund. It might take a few weeks, but it might also be a few $100s that you earned and that the system over-collected. Here's what you now know. The 3 most practically useful ideas are these. First, your payslip is a map. Every line between gross and net has a name, a rule, and a limit. Knowing those rules means you can check whether you're being charged correctly and plan how much you can send home. Second, every remittance has 2 costs, the fee and the exchange rate margin. The cheapest transfer is the one where the most money arrives, not the one with the lowest fee. Third, and this is the one worth remembering, deductions and remittance costs are not 2 separate problems. They're two tolls on the same road. The dollar you earn in the orchard loses value twice before it reaches your family. Protecting it at both ends is how you make every hour of work count. You came here to do something hard. You left your home, your family, your community, and you put in the hours under the sun and the rain because you believed the money would make a difference back home. And it does. The RSE scheme puts real income into Pacific communities every single year. But the more you understand about where your money goes and how to keep more of it, the bigger that difference becomes. Remember that first payslip? The one that didn't make sense? Now every line has a name. Every name has a reason. And the road between the orchard and your family just got a little shorter. This is general education, not personalized financial advice. If you need advice for your situation, talk to a licensed financial advisor.